I definitely did not always think I would found an aircraft company.
How do we like actually get ultra high speed aircraft in commercial use
that
and like
stick?
and keep it? Yeah.
You kind of have to offer operators two different options for how they want to price the service. If you're not really committed to it, where you're going to say like, are you going to quit today? No. If you're not doing that every single day and just like being deliberate, diligent, not willing to lose, you're probably going to lose.
We're here in the factory of Hermeus HQ with CEO and co-founder AJ Piplica. You just gave us an amazing walkthrough of this facility that you have accomplished an insane amount with like a really small number of people very quickly. Before asking about that, what is Hermeus?
Yeah, so Hermeus, our long-term vision is to radically accelerate air travel by building Mach 5 passenger aircraft. And to do that, the first step for us is to radically accelerate air power. So by building autonomous, high-speed aircraft for the Department of Defense and our allied partners.
And going a step deeper, like someone that isn't like into deep tech or flight, why does going faster matter so much for the DoD as well as just like the future vision of passenger travel? Why is that exciting?
Sure. So I'll hit the defense side first. So flying fast gives you kind of like two core capabilities. One is responsiveness and the other is survivability. So some of the challenges that the Department of Defense has, as do a number of our allied partners, especially in the Pacific theater, which is characterized by like a lot of water, very large distances. Like you have to cover a long distance to achieve any goal, whether it's like intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, strike, communications, whatever it may be. You got to cover a lot of distance. So if you want to do something quickly, that means you have to go fast. And all of our, unmanned aircraft fleet right now, it's all subsonic. We do have a number of like supersonic aircraft, generally fairly low range, because they're not designed for like high speed cruise. They're really designed for like high speed sprints. So that's one piece is like getting to a place, conducting a mission, getting back very quickly. The other piece is survivability. So like one of the the most important things about the SR-71 is that like it never got shot down. It got targeted, never got shot down. And this was like a number of years ago, obviously, and air defenses and missiles and things have improved since then. But like the physics of flying fast, like create a vehicle that's like very, very difficult to do anything about. Like it's flying fast, so it's gonna be hot, which means you'll be able to see it in the IR spectrum and whatnot. So like you'll know it's there, but you won't know where it's going. But you will know where it's been. Makes it really hard to shoot down because like it's not just the speed, it's the altitude, it's the maneuverability, it's all these things put together. Along with the tactics of how you fly the aircraft that make it, even for like very sophisticated air defenses, like really, really difficult to deal with. So, it's a capability that can create like a very strong deterrent. Like, all of these allies have this high speed aircraft capability that can do a thing anywhere in the Pacific that needs to be done. Well, we might want to think twice about, doing a thing. So that's like, I think the core defense capability piece. On the passenger side, you are effectively shrinking the world. So like you're taking, let's take the Atlantic Ocean. So the west coast of Europe and the east coast of the United States. Currently, it's about call it 7-8 hours between like New York and London. You bring high-speed aircraft to the game at Mach 5, now it's a 90-minute trip. So you're taking like basically what we have today on the East Coast of the United States between like everywhere from Miami to Boston. Everything there is like basically an hour to hour and a half trip. And like the amount of commerce that occurs in between those places is massive. And a lot of it has to do with being in person. Now, you take that same setup, which is what I call like kind of regional, where like you need to get on a plane, you wouldn't use a train or a car or something like that. You're going to get on an airplane. You take that level of connectivity and expand it to like, okay, now that's across the Atlantic Ocean and North and South, between North and South America. The level of trade and social growth that you will see is massive, right? Yeah. So, and it's like a thing we've normalized to. Like we've normalized to the world moving at Mach 0.8 because that's how fast everything is. So there's, I think, like really an immense latent potential to humanity that can be unlocked by moving the world faster. And like there's plenty of studies that like look back historically and speak to like how that's happened in the past for like various technologies being introduced that sped up, transportation routes and trade routes and whatever, and like drove significant, GDP growth for the affected regions. And we haven't had something like that in a very long time.
What initially inspired you personally to founding Hermeus?
Aerospace engineer by training, and have been building aerospace companies for more than a decade now. I really got bit by the hypersonics bug in college. So I was interning at NASA and I got to work on a bunch of stuff for the space shuttle. So the space shuttle was still flying back then. And the first tour I had, I was working on wing leading edge impact detection system. So like after the Columbia accident, they installed all these accelerometers in the shuttle so they could detect like, oh, something hit the wing here or there, whether it's like on ascent or on orbit from micrometeoroids or whatever. So I got to work that a little bit, and like you learned a little bit about how the shuttle worked and whatnot. And then I came back for another couple of semesters where I worked on shuttle reentry analysis. So this is all like aerothermal analysis of like, okay, well, hey, if there's a little like wedge sticking out the bottom of the shuttle from a repair that we like didn't do correctly, like, is that okay? Or is the shuttle going to like burn up when that happens? So tons of analysis, bunch of ground testing work with arc jets. So got to like learn a ton from like one of the grandfathers of hypersonics, John Burton. Most people won't know who that is, but yeah, he was like just an absolute legend in hypersonics. So that's like who I learned about hypersonics from originally. And then after that, it just kind of like getting reinforced for me. Like I always wanted to work on like really, really hard problems. And like I had a choice in undergrad for senior design. Do I go like do fixed wing design, rotorcraft, or space? And like I really liked aerodynamics and aerothermal stuff. But I ended up going down space stuff, doing satellites because that's what everybody said was harder. So I'm like, all right, I'll try that. But like, there's not a lot to do for an aerodynamicist in space other than like rocket engines, it's vacuum and everything. But hypersonics is kind of like a frontier of aviation. It's not a barrier, but like it's a set of flight environments that we haven't flown in a lot. I think like as a country, we've spent less than 30 minutes in like high speed air breathing flight above Mach 4. So like there's a lot to learn. And there's a lot of, I think, goodness to be had if you're successful in like developing products in that space. So once you get bit by that bug, it's hard to get unbit. So, I spent the next, 5 years or so working on an air-launched liquid rocket vehicle for high-speed flight tests. So, I've been in and around a lot of the hypersonic weapons programs that were being built up within the Air Force and DARPA. Of course, like NASA was involved in that as well. So like I'd seen what was happening. I'd seen now come like 2017, 2018, all the money that the DoD is starting to pour into hypersonic weapons development. And it became pretty clear of like, everybody's looking at this one little thing. Nobody's looking at the next thing.
Yeah.
Which in my mind was hypersonic aircraft, which are fundamentally dual use. Hypersonic weapons are not. Those are military only. Hypersonic aircraft, there's definitely military applications. There's absolutely commercial applications. And the commercial applications are like orders of magnitude more valuable. So it became pretty clear that like there's a place to go build in here that everybody's really like not paying attention to. And it was kind of like, it reminds me a ton of like von Braun hit this a little bit, but like Kennedy smacked it in the face with his speech at I think it was Rice, where like he set the goal for the United States is going to go to the moon, which is like if you look at where we were when he made that speech, like we were very far behind. But what he did was like he changed the game. He instead of like being in a race where like you're behind to a goal that's near, now you're behind to a goal that's very far away. So you're like basically at the same spot as the Russians at the time. So we kind of saw this in hypersonics. So like lots of advancements in China, lots of advancements in Russia in hypersonics. I think a lot of people would argue that the United States is behind in hypersonic weapons, especially. So we looked at that problem and said like, okay, great. Let's go get ahead for the country against a goal that's so far away from everybody's grasp that like it's a completely different playing field. So that's where we decided to spend our time. And it very quickly became a responsibility. Because it was clear like nobody else was coming to do this. Like the big primes weren't going to invest heavily in doing this until the government decided it was something they want to do. And by that point, it's going to be too late anyway. And like the development timelines for advanced capabilities of the Department of Defense are decades or more. And it's very clear to us like the rate at which the threat environment is evolving, especially in the Pacific, is so fast that like that industrial base isn't going to be sufficient for maintaining freedom of navigation in the South China Sea, for example. So like myself, my co-founders, we'd all been in and around this hypersonics world together for a while, and they'd all come from SpaceX and Blue Origin, so they'd seen this happen in the commercial space world. So we had this like very unique set of skills and capabilities. Like we saw this problem. It was like, okay, like we may want to do this, but we have responsibilities. So we have to. So that was, I think, one of the really biggest drivers of quitting our relatively good paying jobs and jumping off together to build an airplane.
So speaking of that jumping off point, obviously you realized the immensity, scale, and amount of money it was going to take, and time and effort and pain to build what Hermeus will be now and in the future. How did you mentally begin to wrap your head around that personally? Like where you're like, oh yeah, we can totally do this, or where you're like, man, how do we approach this? And then also like milestone wise, how do you design investor and key technical milestones around chasing that massive vision?
Yeah, so we knew we weren't so naive to think like, oh, we're just going to go build a Mach 5 aircraft right off the bat. Like there's a huge amount of technical risk, a lot of things that haven't been done before, and we knew we were going to have to iterate. So we really tried to like come up with a plan that harnessed iteration at the system level to buy down the risk as quickly and inexpensively as possible. And like in this world, things always cost more and always take longer than you expect up front, which is like par for the course. But I think we've been able to demonstrate over the past 5 years that like from in an absolute sense, we've made a lot of progress in a very short period of time with a very small amount of money. In terms of like how we like thought about chunking it up against like a fundraising timeline. So like, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to raise your seed round? Well, that's just going to be like the shirt on your back and the PowerPoint you can put together and the story you can tell because you have nothing else. Okay, so like you raise your seed round, a couple $1 million. All right, how are you going to raise your Series A? Like the bar is higher. Well, we probably need some revenue, some like customer traction. So like small business innovative research contracts are good for that, but like you really need to understand that those are not an end in and of themselves. They're a means to like growth, getting into the customer and like doing pilots and stuff like that. So that's going to be important. We're also going to need to like actually like materially de-risk the technical challenge over time. So like what's the right chunk of technical risk to de-risk in that first round? So the engine that we built to do that and prove out that like the overall architecture works at a subscale, and then like take that to the next stage. So like, okay, now you've raised your Series A on demonstrating your engine architecture works, and like customers probably want something in this area. Then like, okay, like go build a real engine and like sign a real contracts with customers. So like not onesie twosie $1 million, but like tens of millions of dollars. So during our A round, we built and tested our like the first iteration of Chimera, so like the JD5, the larger one. Started to really get to work on the aircraft roadmap and really understanding what that's going to look like, and then signed a $30 million contract with the Air Force that monetized a number of steps along that aircraft and engine roadmap that we'd already built. So like very, very tight alignment between our revenue streams and what we need to do anyway has really helped to stay focused, stay lean, stay small, and not get distracted by all sorts of things that the customers may want. And then in the B round, the B round is all about the airplanes. So that's what we've been working on here in the near term, and delivering on that like one aircraft per year cadence. Get in the air with this one, and then go supersonic with the next one, and then do mode transition and break the SR-71 speed record with the third one.
Back to that moment though, where you're considering co-founding Hermeus. I know a lot of founders and future founders watch S3, and like I'm sure that people are curious, like what was the mental personal journey of deciding to go and do Hermeus and think about like, was it a 0 on like, yep, gonna do it. Okay, it's gonna be hard, but I'm gonna go figure it out. Or was there a lot of like mental kind of stickiness to work through? What was that personal experience for you, like going from state 0, never, or did you always think you would found an aircraft company like this?
I definitely did not always think I would found an aircraft company like this. No, I had been interested in entrepreneurship for a long time. I was like very grateful to have like an entrepreneurial experience in my previous company where it was like building a business within a small business. So I got the management side of it, of like building a team small, like less than 20 people, and like millions of dollars running through the business on an annual basis, like not huge. But to like make the decision to like take the leap and go try. It was definitely not a thing that just like happened overnight. This is like months and months of like, is this right for the family? Because it's like all of us are at very different stages. Like, one of my co-founders, had 3 kids, so it's like that's probably the tallest bar of all of ours here. But I think what it came down to at the end of the day was like, what are the constraints that we can put on the problem that like make the like kind of worst case downside risk acceptable? So in that case for us, it was like, all right, we're going to take 6 months and see what we can do. So like, no salary, no nothing, like, push out the mortgages, push out the student loans, do anything you can, get as much help from families as possible. But like, take a legitimate amount of time where you can demonstrate like, is there a there or is there not? Like the hypothesis that you might have, flesh it out, and then see if it's like, can you prove it positive or negative? So that like time constraint was very, very important.
Well, and what were those 6 months? What was the work going on there? What did you think?
Yeah. So we spent about 3 months like learning how to spell VC. And by what I mean by that is like, you have 4 engineers starting a business, like you probably got to like figure out how to fundraise.
Sure.
Because that was like the main goal for those 6 months was like raise a round of funding that gets you to the next thing. We really had to like retrain our brains, how we communicated, how we thought, how we presented material, all of that kind of stuff. And just like a lot of trying and failing, going into our network and just like asking people who like had raised money before, who are investors, like, hey, how does this work? All that stuff. You read a lot of books. Books are great.
It was really state zero for you guys though.
Oh, totally.
That's
100%. 100%. Yeah, it was nothing. Like none of us had prior like actual entrepreneurial experience of like raising money or none of us had like real networks. But like turns out Coastal Ventures led our seed round. And the way that intro happened, like Skylar, one of my co-founders, went to college with a guy who was like friends with a guy who had just left Coastal Ventures. And like, that was actually the first pitch that we ever did. We didn't even know it was a pitch. It went terribly, but that guy was the one who made the introduction to KV. And so it's crazy how this all happens. But
now here we are sitting around two test aircraft and a few engines and
yeah, a couple years later, it's very, very real. But I think like you really kind of have to be committed to the long term, like especially in a hard, deep tech business like this. Like you're not going in expecting to like exit and be sitting on a beach or whatever in like 3 years. Like if that's the idea you're going in with, you're going to be sorely mistaken, and you will not be willing to accept and go through the pain that's required to be successful. Because like it is immensely painful, and I think that's a lot of thing. It's a thing that like people don't think about up front, like just how hard it's going to be, personally, professionally, all your relationships, everything. Like you have to make very, very hard decisions. You're constantly at the frontier of your capabilities. Like you're doing things that you've never done before. In order to be successful, you have to build a team that's better than you and is more experienced than you in all these areas. So they constantly push you to get better. So it's like it never gets easier. Like the more successful you are, the higher the bar goes up, and it only gets harder. Like the only way it gets easier is when you quit. So like if you're not really committed to it, where you're gonna say like, "Are you gonna quit today?" No, if you're not doing that every single day and just like being incredibly deliberate, diligent, and just like not willing to lose, you're probably gonna lose. So it's definitely a crazy journey.
So would you say your kind of main mental model for dealing with the pain is kind of questioning and testing your commitment often, or is there another way you look?
Yeah, I think like the personal way that I deal with that kind of stuff is like kind of like how I described the like start the business in the first place. Like, what is the worst case downside, and can I accept that? And as soon as you can say yes to that, like, okay, no matter what happens, if this all goes to complete garbage, can I accept? Like, can I live in that world? And if the answer is yes, then it's like, then it's all upside. And it's not everybody likes to think that way. But for me, at least, like, because it forces you to really think about what the downside is. And I think most humans overweight the downside risk of a thing and underweight the upside of it being successful. So I just kind of like, I know the upside is big and good if successful. So like, I'm not even going to worry about that because I think that can drive you to a bad place if you're too focused on that. So it's like, fine, that's going to be good. There's no question about that. So it's like, how can I properly manage the downside so that I don't even have to think about it at all? And I think like that's pretty straightforward to do even at each of these steps. Because like even in the first days, like all right, we spent 6 months doing this, and we've put a lot of our our savings into this and whatnot. It's like I'm going to learn more in that 6 months than I've learned in the past 6 years, and I'm going to be way more employable at the end of that than I am now. Not that I'm not employable now, but like it's going to help. So like when the downside is framed that way, it's like
properly measure the upside. It's like it's all huge.
Yeah,
basically.
it's like okay, well if that happens, I can accept that. So yeah, great, go on, do it.
Awesome.
So yeah, for me, it's just like it removes that psychological barrier, and like there's definitely some gamesmanship in it, because like risk is definitely real. I mean, like we're building things that are very dangerous at some point, especially like we want to fly people. Like yeah, like people's hands or people's lives will be in our hands, and like you can only minimize the downside risk of that so much.
Yeah.
And so like you got to be really okay with what that means. But like even now, right? Like we're a 200 person company. The lives of 200 people and their families are like dependent on what we as a leadership team do. So like the stakes just keep getting higher and higher. So yeah, if you like lose sight of that, I think it can drive you down a kind of weird alignment of incentives path as a founder.
Interesting.
If you forget like who you're really working for, it's like you're working for your team, you're working for your customers, and as long as you keep that in front of your mind, it's like that's part of why us is in the company's name. It's like to always remind us like we're about our people.
It's awesome. Great advice. You guys have gone incredibly fast with your development and building things. What are some of your biggest learnings or mental models you have about going really fast?
Putting like irreversible decisions aside, and I think like it's actually a very small percentage of decisions. Most decisions are actually like quite reversible.
Yeah.
It is way better to make the wrong decision today than the right decision like a month from now.
Interesting.
So like a bias to action is quite important, and like having that as part of your culture of like what does it mean to go fast? Well, it's like you need to make decisions quickly. You can't overanalyze. Because like you can sit in analysis paralysis land trying to needle on uncertainties, and like you're just like playing a game of false precision, and it will make you go slow. So like you have to get very comfortable with uncertainty and being willing to change based on new information. Like you need, and that's not to say like be reckless.
Right.
Like you need to be very prudent in your decision making and systematic about how you think about risk, upsides, downsides, all of that. But like a decision made faster, even if it ends up being wrong and you have to change it later, is usually better than a decision made later.
Interesting. It sounds like you guys are like world experts on properly minimizing the risk potential of like a bad decision and like navigating and channel mapping through that really.
Yeah.
Really
So it's like another way to think about this, and maybe it's like a little separate bucket here. It's like you want to make a large number of small decisions. And like manage risk at that level versus like a small number of very large high risk decisions.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, that makes tons of sense.
yeah. So like this is why iteration is so important. There's this old adage of like it is faster to build a 3-inch telescope and then a 6-inch telescope than like just a 6-inch telescope.
Interesting. Yeah.
And part of that is because of like iteration. Like, oh, you built a telescope before, so you know how to build a telescope.
Right.
So you can build the other one faster versus like it's harder to try to figure. There's more complexity in something that's bigger to figure it out for the first time. So, and this is why like we built Mark 0, and we built Mark 1, and we've divvied up our risks this way, and we've built a business that can build 1 aircraft per year because you need that pace of iteration to go after these risks in very complex systems. Because like if you just try to build a Mach 5 airplane right off the bat, even a small one,
good luck.
well, it's like your
prediction.
your prediction for schedule at the beginning, it's probably going to grow by 3x, 4x, versus like you can much better predict a smaller chunk of risk.
Yeah.
Like go do it. Now you know more, and then you predict the next chunk of risk, and then you know more. So like the total uncertainty and call it schedule that you have at the end by this iterative approach is way smaller than if you just try to do it as one big thing.
That's an amazing engineering building insight. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I mean like Starship versus SLS.
Yeah. Great example.
Perfect.
The SR-71 was retired like 20 years ago. Why hasn't the U.S. built and flown faster since then?
Yeah, so flying fast is very hard. Kelly Johnson, who is arguably and I'll fight anybody on this. The best aircraft designer of all time. Um, excuse me. He said like a couple years before he died, the SR-71 flying at Mach 3 plus for extended periods of time was the hardest thing that I ever did in my career and the most difficult thing that Lockheed has done since. So for like the greatest of all time to say like this is the hardest thing that I was able to achieve, that gives you a feel for just how hard it is. So I think there's that. You got to look at the story of the SR-71, the time that it came into. Like satellites really weren't ubiquitous back then. Most like intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance was done with like these like capsules that you shoot a rocket, you take a picture in a photo capsule, it comes off the rocket, you catch it with an airplane.
Yeah,
ridiculous. And then like the U-2 that came in, that was like high altitude reconnaissance plane, which like could start doing a lot of this stuff. And then Gary Powers got shot down. So like survivability became an important element of it. So speed became the answer to survivability back because we didn't have stealth technology back then. The F-117 came well after the SR-71. So like speed was the way that we countered adversary air defenses. So that's what created the SR-71 in the first place. So it lived from like, when did it fly the first time? The A-12 was probably in the 60s, I think. I have to go back and look, but like 1960s. And like the SR-71 was retired in 90s, something like that, maybe 2000s. I really should know these dates actually, but you can fact check me on it. But anyway, like more recent times. So like it flew for a very long time. And in that time, we started to invest in stealth. We figured out how to do that. The F-117 came along and the B-2 stealth bomber and all these things. So now we had this other tool for operating in contested environments called stealth. And we had a massive advantage in stealth versus like the counters to it on the adversary side. And we could basically operate with like complete impunity in contested airspaces. And like over time, since like the early 90s and especially in the 2000s and now in this this decade, the advantage of stealth has kind of started to wane because like the rate at which stealth is getting better is not as high, at least in my opinion, as the rate at which the counters to it are getting better, which is like higher power radars, networking radars together with surface to air missile batteries, and laying AI over the top of it to drive. Like the decision chain is much faster. You're not relying on humans to talk on a radio and do all these things. So like the integrated air defense environment is way, way more difficult to deal with today, even for stealth aircraft. And like the rate at which stealth is improving is not nearly at the same rate that all these other counter capabilities are. So that creates an opportunity for like the same way that the SR-71 came in and brought speed, altitude, maneuverability to the game to do that again. But like the bar is higher. Right? Like Mach 3 probably isn't fast enough. So that's where like the gap is being filled. And then like you add in some of like the nature of the theater and the Pacific and the distances, and now the responsiveness comes in and is important. So
on the commercial side, I don't know when the Concorde last flew, but how do all high-speed aircraft companies in general, all, like you guys included, like everyone, how do we avoid that happening again? How do we like actually get ultra high-speed aircraft in commercial use and keep it? Yeah.
So Concorde is an interesting story. I say it died of old age. Like it flew for 30 years, and in its time was arguably, and you can look at the numbers, like it was one of the safest aircraft. It had one accident that was not because it was the Concorde. There's maybe some like design things like where the inlets were relative to the gear and whatnot, but like there's literally a piece of aluminum that was on the runway that whatever the next plane was going to hit. So like arguably a very, very successful program. But from a financial perspective, like it took them a long time to figure out how to price it properly and whatnot. And like really the only way for it to like close the business case was like very high priced, high margin operation which that like knocks out a huge amount of market. So like to bring it back successfully and sustainably, you kind of have to offer operators, airlines, like two different options for how they want to price the service. So, and you do that by delivering a capability where it can be profitable at today's business class prices if you want to take that strategy. So that allows airlines to take one of two strategies. You can either take the like high margin, like small market share side, which is what Concorde did, or you can instead take a market capture approach where it's like you price it the same as business class. So the consumer, from their perspective, it's not like, should I pay 10x for this trip from A to B? It's like same price. Do I want to like sleep in my own bed or sleep on an airplane? And that's a pretty easy decision. So it's going to drive adoption in a very different way than Concorde did. But like the bar is like you have to deliver where that's possible. Yeah. And I think like what's changed between Concorde's day and today, Concorde was like the Apollo program of Britain and France. So like well before its time technologically, and much in the same way as like the Apollo program wasn't sustainable. We didn't stay on the moon. We did it and moved on. In that sense, Concorde like lived on much, much longer than that did. But like the economics of the Saturn V and all that like were not particularly sustainable either. And like we've seen what's happened today in launch vehicles and rockets as you brought modern like computational methods and computing to design and manufacturing and modern manufacturing methods and decades and decades of iteration on engines and materials and all these things. All of those improvements together now put you in a place where you really can design a system that can deliver like that operating price point where those two outcomes are possible. So it still has to be proven, but it's definitely possible now where I don't think it was. And honestly, I don't think it would be possible today if SpaceX hadn't been as successful as they had. Like that like proof point of like private industry coming in and like completely rewriting the book on like a ingrained like legacy, very government driven industry and turning it on its head. Like if that can happen in rockets, it's happened in rockets now, it's happened in cars, it's happened in satellites, it hasn't happened in airplanes yet. You're seeing it, you're starting to see it maybe in some of like the electric aircraft world and eVTOL, so like Archer, Joby, companies like that. You're starting to see it there, but it's going to happen in real airplanes too, both in the military world and in the commercial world.
For people who are earlier in their career and are thinking about what to build, what's exciting to work on, you always had an interest in flight, and then it sounded like that molded into hypersonics over time. What advice or sort of like going back either to yourself or to others would you suggest for figuring out like what these sort of lifelong, very exciting problems are? Because I think sometimes people see like there's Hermeus, there's SpaceX, there's all these exciting companies doing cool things, and it's like, oh, what's left to work on? How do you chase these? How do you chase?
Well, so it's funny. I think everything in aerospace was invented in the 50s, but not everything in aerospace actually works yet. So there's a hell of a lot to figure out and a lot of hard problems to work on. And energy is a super exciting space right now. I mean, the number of atomic energy companies, whether fusion, fission, whatever, that are working on really hard problems that are going to change the world right now. Amazing. Mentioned like vertical takeoff and landing, electric aircraft, high-speed aircraft, rocket. Like there's just so many things. Like if you'd asked me when I started college, which decade do you wish you lived in right now as an aerospace engineer? I would have told you the 1950s. Like that was it.
Yeah.
And now the answer is like this right now.
Right.
Like this is the best time ever in the history of humanity to be interested in aerospace and working in the area. So like, what advice would I give to like, folks who are in college right now or like even in high school and like what should I do? Like just try it. You've got an amazing opportunity in college. Like, I mean, you can intern at all these places. And like go try it, figure out what you like, what you don't like, and iterate, same kind of thing. And like you have a great, that is so much what college is for. Like don't wait till you're out in the like industry world and like you have a job and just, whatnot to like try things. Like do that in college. People are like, oh, college is about trying things. Yes, it absolutely is. More than just the party stuff.
Right.
Very much like, yeah, go try this thing. I think I regret from my college time was like I didn't do competitive engineering clubs, and that's a piece of advice I give absolutely everyone. Like, go do design, build, fly. Go do Formula SAE. Go do Rocket Club. Things where like you were put under time pressure, cost pressure, you're just doing everything. Like
Yeah.
you have to do everything by yourself. So you learn so fast.
Awesome.
And that mechanism is like what builds, I think, some of the best engineers. And it's a huge thing that we look for, and not just early career folks, but later career folks that we hire here at Hermeus. So, yeah, that's it.
This last question is a little weird, but I think it's interesting to ask founders. What would you describe your current life philosophy as?
I'm definitely a thinker, so I'm like very hesitant to answer it on the spot. But like win. Like have the right priorities in not just in work but in life.
Yeah.
And like I don't believe that work-life balance is a thing. Like work-life integration is a thing. And like, yeah, you can work your days off, 120 hours a week, but like you're making a sacrifice and a trade-off intentionally there with your family, whether you're married, you have a partner, you have kids, whatever, or not. Like there's trade-offs that you're making there. So yeah, like really having perfect clarity on your priorities and then ensuring that you're living up to those priorities. But like at the end of the day, you've got to have a very clear picture of like what success looks like. Like what do I want at the end of all this? Yeah. And then that shouldn't be changing a lot. And once you have that, then it's like, okay, go win, go do that. Yeah, I think when you have like extreme clarity on that across the entirety of your life, you will do great things.
Off the cuff, that was a brilliant answer. AJ, thanks for taking the time and thanks for building Hermeus.
Yeah, of course, this has been great.
It was awesome, man.
You bet.